Welcome to the Biodynamics Now podcast. This is your host, Alan Ballier. This is part one of a multiple-part program with biodynamic educator Glenn Atkinson. The topic is how Steiner's medical lectures inform his agricultural lectures. If you're not familiar with Rudolf Steiner and biodynamics or have motivation as a biodynamic practitioner to gain deep insights into the basic principles of biodynamic agriculture, then there is no reason to listen to this particular lecture series. Like me, you'd be better off getting yourself a biodynamic cookbook and following explicit procedures. Not to take anything away from the importance and power of what Glenn wants to teach here. It's very important for anyone who wants to expand, as Rudolf Steiner asked people to do, on Steiner's basic indications. This is a very heady program. As you will hear, Glenn leaves me behind in the first 10 minutes, probably the first 5 minutes. And this is no reflection on Glenn as a teacher. It's a topic which to me, who, for example, is still traumatized by high school chemistry class, it's hard to wrap your mind around, or does it open your mind to? Anyway, if you're going to slog forward, Glenn has provided some PowerPoint-style graphics for this topic. They're at the show notes at bdnow.org. He also provided a copy of his paper on equisetum, BD 508, which is referenced in the lecture. This will give you a good idea of the concepts in the lecture in practice. The paper is also at the show notes for this episode, which is at bdnow.org. Remember, if listening to these podcasts bring up any questions, you can ask those questions in the reply section of the show notes of this episode. Glenn will be directly answering your questions posted there. If you're not planning on using or going this deeply into biodynamic practice, you owe it to yourself and frankly others who will read your questions and Glenn's response to take advantage of this opportunity. As always, if you appreciate what you're trying to accomplish with these podcasts on producing food of the highest nutritional quality, food fit for growing a true human being, please leave a positive comment at the end of the show notes, and please rate us with the maximum stars at iTunes or whichever podcast distributor you use. Here's Glenn. Thank you. So good evening, Glenn. This will be, I believe it's our third special Biodynamics Now podcast, which deals with your in-depth knowledge of biodynamics. And the topic of today's conversation is what is the gift of Rudolf Steiner's medical lectures to his agricultural lectures?
Yep. Hello. Yep. Thanks.
Okay. Do you want to sort of block that out for us?
Oh, okay. Yep. Fine. Thank you for having me back here to do another one of these podcasts. So, yes, this is a subject that's been sort of dear to my heart for many years. And I guess it's because I began my biodynamic journey through Valeda, the Steiner pharmacy company. And so I was exposed to the medical view, right from the start. And there's always been this lingering question as to why the story I hear coming through biodynamics doesn't really mesh with the medical lecture story. And it wasn't until I'd finished my research, you might say, into chemistry and so on, that I had a bit of time to go back and look at this, why these two stories are a bit different. And you might remember that over the years of BD Now, Hugh Lovell and I had this long-term debate about, and the reason that it carried on for so many years was that, in a sense, Hugh was telling the biodynamic story, which we can class as a threefold story, just looking at a expansive process coming from the earth and a contractive process coming from above. And in the middle, you might say, we find this story about the ethers and how there's these four ethers that we can see manifesting in plant form. but we can only really work with them through physical activity like light or mulching to increase the moisture and this sort of thing. And whereas, I sort of talk a more complex story that is very obvious in the agriculture lectures once you see it. And so once I, had a bit of time, this disparity between the medical and the agriculture stories really became quite clear to me. So in a sense, I guess this is what we can talk about today is what is the medical story, and how can this inform the agriculture course. Now, I have attended the international post-medical training courses that are going on around the world. There's like 17 of these trainings around the world every year at the moment. And I've been to the last two that's in Australia. And so I have a certificate for 100 hours of, anthroposophical medical training.
Oh, really?
As well as, having read all the courses and so on over the years 2 or 3 times. So this idea that the medical worldview is different to the agriculture worldview, it's not my own fantasy. So later this year, we're hoping to run a sort of seminar with some anthroposophical doctor and a pharmacist talking about this and how we might be able to, work more closely together. So this is a subject quite dear to my heart, I guess. Now, probably a good place to start would be for me to just give a bit of a picture of the medical worldview, really.
Okay.
Now, I have attached a PDF here that no doubt you'll have available on the podcast. And so this provides a whole bunch of pictures that we can refer to. Now, I appreciate that it is primarily a talking interview here, so I'll try and keep it as, literally pictorial as possible. But I will refer to these various pictures just so it can make it easier for people at some point.
Okay, and so that people listening to this know that PDF will be available at bdnow.org.
Yeah. Okay, so, one of the sort of the bottom line of Rudolf Steiner's worldview is this whole concept of as above, so below. And what this is really saying is that if we want to look at life and the sort of intricate organization of life, we have to look above, look at the astronomy of our creation and see what's real there, and then apply those patterns and laws to life. Now, we can see throughout Rudolf Steiner's lectures, he continually does this. And there is a particular course, I think it was given in 1924, and it's classically called the astronomy course, even though he doesn't want it called the astronomy course. It is called the astronomy course. And through those lectures, he's continually finding these big patterns in astronomy and then showing how they're manifesting within the life processes of creation. And so this is the process, really. Now, I need to just make a comment that while Rudolf Steiner was, a polymath and fantastic at a lot of different things, I think most astrologers consider that he was a slightly below average astrologer. He certainly had good astronomical understandings and he kept using astrological reference, but there are certain things that really show up a little bit of a deficiency. And one of those things that keeps showing up in anthroposophical speakers is that he didn't really clarify a difference between the stars and the planets. And on my sort of second slide, there's a picture of the solar system there. And this picture really gives an image of the sun as a star, which is just this nuclear reactor cooking hydrogen, and the planets. And the planets are really just these balls of iron and carbon and cosmic dust that are a little more than compost heaps. And so this sort of indicates this very essential difference between the star realm, which are nuclear reactors, and the planet realm, which are compost heaps. So this is a really important differentiation that we need to make when we look above, because when we look above us, what we can do is let's start from the Earth, that we're sitting on right here in front of us here. And we're living within an atmosphere of the Earth. And this atmosphere is created by the life processes of the Earth. And while it's a 80% nitrogen gaseous environment, there's around 20% oxygen that is being liberated into our atmosphere by the life processes of the planet itself. The blue-green algae and all the plants are liberating this oxygen into the environment, which of course we live upon and the animals use and so on. So this is a living sphere of the Earth. And then beyond that, we can see that we are a planet amongst a group of planets that are all moving around the sun. And so we have this planetary sphere as an astronomical reality. And then, of course, the sun is really just one of trillions of suns that make up the rest of our cosmos. And so these are these four astronomical spheres that we can identify: a star sphere, a planetary sphere, the atmosphere around the Earth, and then the physical Earth itself. Now, Steiner makes quite a point of looking at how those cosmic activities then manifest into life. And so what we see there is that we have these four energetic activities coming from the cosmos that we can then see throughout the whole story of creation. And the basis of this is that we can identify that from the physical Earth and through the carbon, we have this physical body that the plants, the animals, the humans all share. And the mineral kingdom, of course, also is this physical manifestation. Now, from the atmosphere, with its 20% oxygen, we can identify that we also have this living process within us, and that we use that oxygen to sustain our living processes. And interestingly, in this region between the physical surface of the Earth and the ionosphere, we have the Schaumann cavity, what's called the Schaumann cavity, and within that there's this energetic resonance of 7.8 hertz, and that we can see that we also, our living body resonates at 7.8 hertz. And so there's this very symbiotic relationship between our life energy and the atmosphere of the Earth. We then see that the next energetic and we call that living body the etheric body. And then we can see that the planetary sphere of all these 9 different compost heaps are moving. And really, when we look around, these are the only moving parts, the planets. And most of those planets have a surface of nitrogen, just as we have 80% nitrogen. And it's in the nitrogen processes that the activities of the planets are carried. And in ourselves, when we do an astrological birth chart, we're looking at the positions of the planets, and these planets and their relationships are telling us about a person's psychology. So what they're feeling, what they're thinking, what their fears are, what their joys are, their sensations. And so this sensation body we call the astral body. And literally, astrology to me is this study of this sensation psychology part of us. And then, of course, the next stage is this star aspect of ourselves. And just as the sun is this sort of central core thing upon which the whole of the solar system finds its organization, so we have a part of that inside of us as well, and we experience that as the observer. So the part of us that is sitting there observing ourselves, listening to this podcast at this time, that observer is this internal spirit character. And this is the part, of course, that in the Bhagavad Gita, the Hindu scripture, they talk about this eternal aspect of ourselves that can never die. It just lives on from one life through to the next. And it's this observer spirit character that is really us. It's really the bit that we can say I, and that we can return to as quite a calm center. And so the observer is living with this astral body. So this just as the planets are an accumulation of cosmic dust over a long period of time, so our astral body is this accumulation of the results of all of our experiences and feelings and emotions through all of our lifetimes. And so this is what we're seeing in a birth chart, is this astral body, this accumulation of experience. And in that sense, psychosis, any psychosis we're seeing in the birth chart is something we've made ourselves out of our journey through time. And so these four pieces of the above, the spirit activity or the star activity, the planet activity, the atmosphere activity, and the physical activity, are these four processes that we look at through all of life. And so in the medical work, these four activities are very, very clearly defined and quite consciously used. Now, in the agriculture work, of course, these terms, the physical body is seen pretty much as a lump of rock, a bit of carbon. And then we do talk about a life process, the etheric, and we talk about the astrality being this contractive process from above. But we very, very rarely talk about the process of spirit or the stars as a formative influence in nature. It tends to get sort of put to the individuality of the farm is carried in the individuality of the farmer. And so often the astral influences are given to the animals in the farm, instead of actually seeing the spirit as a formative process that's active within the plant, that's going to manifest as the seed of the plant, and the upright process within the plant. So these spirit and astral processes tend to get pushed away and not seen as these sort of intimate parts of the growth process. So, so within the medical lectures, what we see is that these four basic primary processes are given, a big area, a big influence, but really one of the key things that Steiner talked about is the physical body is broken up into these three different systems, so that we have a nerve sense system, a rhythmic system, and a metabolic system. And Biodynamics talks about this and gives this quite a pride of place in their theology. And but the point with the medical work is that they're seeing that within these three physical systems, these four activities are always working. So when we talk about the nerve sense system, we are also talking about how is the spirit working there? How is the astral working there? How is the etheric and how are the physical activities working in the nerve sense system? And the same with the metabolic. When we're looking at a problem within the metabolic system, how is it a manifestation of these four activities? And so it gives a much more defined and you could say sophisticated ability to describe a problem and also to therefore find a solution. So how's that sounding? Is that easy enough to follow?
Well, honestly, I'm anxious to get a hold of the visuals for this.
Oh, okay, right.
Oh no,
I did send them there. You know, I sent them to you there on email. Okay, just chop a little bit out, of course.
Yeah, no, just keep going, Glenn. Don't consider me to be the perfect student.
Okay, rightio. So, so that's the basic overview and the basic sort of difference that can sort of manifest here. Now, I guess it's important to just see how is this being expressed within the medical lectures, this basic concept of these four activities. Now, when we come to, we're basically worked our way through these pictures and we're essentially, we've come, let's say, we can say within biodynamics, these four activities are described in many different ways. Now, the first place that we find them, of course, is in the organisation of the kingdoms of nature. And this is shown in the 8th slide in the PDF. And what we see here is that the mineral kingdom is just the physical activity. And when we come to the plant kingdom, we get this atmospheric activity and we, in a sense, pick up the earth with this life body. And this is what we see manifest within the plant kingdom, that we have the physical substance of carbon, but we have the growth process taking place within the plant. So we see leaves taking place. And then the point is, though, that these cosmic activities of the planets and the stars, they're still present in the plant kingdom, but they tend to work from the outside. So those activities, while still active, come from the outside. And there's another picture here I need to just find. And when we come to number 15 picture, in that picture, it's an image from Lecture 8 in the agriculture course. And in that picture, Steiner's given us an image of the plant, and he's put a shading over the top that he calls astral, and then there's a shading underneath the root of the plant, which he puts ego potential, which is really this activity of spirit. Okay. And so is the physical, and then the leaf area has this etheric activity of the plant. And so it's that diagram there that really holds the key to how these four processes are active. And so it gives us this hint that this spirit and physical activity work together from the below of the plant and work upwards, and that this etheric and astral activity work in the top area of the plant, in the leaf and the flower and so on. So that's really one of the clear images of the course that gives us this understanding here in the plant kingdom. Now, when we come to the animal kingdom, of course, with plants, can't move. They're stuck in one place and they have to respond to the environment as best they can. Whereas with animals, where we're bringing in this astral body. And of course, we're moving the carbohydrate chemistry of the plant kingdom. We're now adding nitrogen. We're adding this astral body into that carbohydrate chemistry, and we get the formation of protein. And so we see this formation of animal protein and so on. But at the same time, this consciousness and awakeness comes to the animal kingdom, and if they don't like the sensation of where they're standing at any moment, they just move on. They can move around to a place that's more compatible to their feelings, and so this is what we have with this animal kingdom. However, we can still see that the individuality of the animal is not fully incarnated. And so they live in herds and schools of fish and packs of wolves and so on. They live much more within this collective being still. Whereas when we come to the humans, we have all of those qualities of the animal, but we incarnate the spirit, so we can have a greater sense of our own individuality and our own independence from that collective group. And this, in a sense, allows us to be freer spiritual individuals in our whole way of living. And I've got to say, I now contend that this process of individualization has somehow warped a little bit, and we're now over-individualized, so that it's virtually impossible for people to come together as a group and function, in a healthy manner. This sense of over-individualization keeps getting in the way. So, okay, this is one way that we're seeing how these four activities are all working together within our manifestation. Now, if we go just look at picture number 9 in the PDF, there's this picture that Steiner gives in the 1924 lectures that he was talking to priests and doctors, and this was literally 6 months before he died. So this is one of the last lecture series that he gave, and in a sense, my image of Steiner is, we talked last time about in 1923 he was poisoned, and that in that last 18 months there was these tremendously pivotal works that he gave. And of course the agriculture lectures were in the June of 1924, and in September he stopped lecturing, and in the following March he died. So these medical lectures were one of the last he gave, and my comment last time was that it's like in those last 18 months he got very, very clear about his story and his picture, and he gave some very technical detail about the workings of these energetic activities. And so it is in this medical lectures that he gives this picture of the way that these four activities organize within the human. And so there's a picture there where he's got 4 lines. There's a white square line, which is the physical body, a yellowy line just outside of that, which indicates the etheric body. There's a sort of wavy line, which indicates the astral body, and then a red line of the spirit that just encompasses it all and holds it all together. And so from the medical lectures, we get a very clear understanding that the physical body is like the car that we're driving around in. The etheric body is the fuel. But of course, if we just put a match to petrol, it'll explode and just boof into this chaos. And this is a bit like the etheric body. It's just a growth force. It just will grow, and this is what we're seeing in cancer. Cancer is where the spirit, the architect of the whole game, has lost control of the direction of the growth forces. And so therefore we get this formation of a tumor that just grows in a non-specific way. And this is what the etheric body does. And we get this concept very clearly in the medical lectures, whereas in biodynamics, because of the sort of fascination with the ethers, it's often perceived that the etheric body has has its own formative principle. And in fact, it doesn't. It's very clear in the medical work that the etheric body is just this growth process, and that the formative principle of the etheric body comes from the way in which the spirit and the astrality work into the etheric. And so I have various quotes, and in my Equisetum article, I believe I put it in there, where Steiner points out very clearly that the light ether is really just an expression of how the astral activity works into the etheric body. And similarly, the warmth activity, the warmth ether, is really just the way that the spirit is working into the etheric body. And so we can, get a much clearer image of what these energies are. And so, we start to see that within the plant, the working of the etheric is this amorphous, undirected, watery activity. And so when we're thinking of fungus and thinking of the 6th lecture, we have this quite confusing passage where Rudolf Steiner is talking about too much moon force, too much growth, too much vitality causing fungus. And so we usually think growth and vitality is a very, very positive thing. But once it's lost its controller, it's lost its plan, then it just sort of functions in this uncontrolled sort of rot. And so when we come to look at fungus, and we can see there's actually 4 players in the game and not just 2, then we can start to see not only a more sophisticated understanding, but we can also come up with more sophisticated remedies. Because as the picture is at the moment, or for fungal control, it's just this expansive below process, and so Equisetum can be used as a contracted process from above. And of course, this story gets very, very confused amongst various commentators, but we'll talk about that a bit later. So yeah, we have this picture of these 4 activities as they manifest in the human. Now, in the next slide, slide 10, this is a graph of about 15 different lines. And what I said earlier on is in the medical work, we're forever challenged to look for the 4 processes within everything. And so even when we come to a particular organ like the kidneys, the question is, how are we seeing these 4 processes manifesting in the kidneys or in the liver or whatever? And so this is the same thing that we can see in biodynamic agriculture, is the challenges in every aspect of the plant that we can look at. How can we find these 4 processes taking place? And of course, within the standard biodynamic theology, this is where people talk about the ethers a lot. And there's become this whole quite sophisticated story about how the light ether will manifest in the flowering process, or if we're looking into the leaf and we're seeing a pointed leaf within the plant, we're actually seeing a light ether process manifesting there. And it's really, how do we take that further? And we can, look into the plant, as I said, and we're pretty much identify that this earth process manifests in the roots, the atmosphere etheric process in leaves, the solar system process in flowers, and the star process we identify in seed and in fruit. But, when we look, say, for the fruit itself, we can see that there's these 4 processes that we can identify, one being the tissue quality of the fruit, one can be the size of the fruit, the other might be the nutritive value through the ripening process, and then, of course, whether we've got viable seed or not. And so we can go through and look at everything. The question is, where are these 4 processes? And one of the most interesting parts of the agriculture course that I find is avoided like the plague is actually the last 2/3 of the second lecture. And, in the first lecture, we get this lovely picture of cosmic and earthly activities. And Steiner just tells us about the astronomical reality we're living in and starts talking about how calcium carries this earthly process and the silica in our environment carries the cosmic process. And of course, we naturally just go, well, cosmic is above and earthly is below. And so this must be the way this is all working. And then we come to the second lecture, and he begins the story by telling us about the three physical processes, the three physical systems of the nerve sense, head region, the chest region, and the metabolic belly system. And he says how the human is really how the soil, and the plant kingdom are organized as if the human was turned upside down with their head in the ground, and how this nerve sense consolidated part of our body is associated to the root, and how our chest region is related to the plant and the rhythmic breathing processes that are going on in the leaf, and then how our reproductive system and metabolic system of the human is really imaged in the flower and the seeding process of the plant kingdom. And so this threefold physical organism of the plant is quite clearly outlined there. And then the next sort of 2/3 of that lecture is taken up with talking about how these four processes that I've been describing manifests within this cosmic and earthly process. And so in there he talks about, and he starts giving these things different names. And of course, this is one of the problems of Rudolf Steiner, is that he's got a very multi-layered story. So he's talking about the stars and the planets. And of course, within our atmosphere, we have the ionosphere, the stratosphere, the troposphere, the geosphere. So within creation, we actually have a lot of different layers. And so every time Steiner describes these four activities in a different layer, he gives them a different name. And this, of course, makes it a little bit tricky. And I have, put a bit of effort into clarifying this. And in my books, I've given these sort of gyroscopic glossary. That's not in this PDF, I've got to say, but that's in my books, easy to find. And so it's one of the important issues of the agriculture course is that Steiner says the ABC of everything is what is cosmic and what is earthly in plant growth. And so this is this sort of key image that the agriculture course language is based upon cosmic and earthly activities. And it's one of the odd things about biodynamics is that they just go cosmic is contractive, earthly is expansive, and we'll just leave it there. So they've just got the beginning of lecture 2, and then they start talking about the ethers as being these formative principles. Now, in the agriculture course, Steiner mentioned the ethers very, very quickly in one of the lectures. It's basically one paragraph, and there might be one or two other very small references to the ethers. And the rest of the course is either talking about the four energetic activities of spirit, astral, etheric, and physical, or he's talking about cosmic and earthly activities. And when he's talking about the cosmic activities, we can see, first of all, in the second lecture, this last part of the second lecture, that he talks about cosmic forces and cosmic substance. And then he talks about earthly forces and earthly substance. And in this second lecture, he talks about how we have a formative process that's taking place in the energetic sphere, and then we come into manifestation, and then the plant goes through its physical manifesting process. And so this building up the energy before birth is really this force realm, and then all of the growth processes that are taking place through the plant growing is this substance or manifest side of the story. And so he's saying within both the silica process and the calcium process, we have these two sides of the coin. We have the cosmic forces being active in the development of the behind the scenes processes, and then as we come into manifestation, the silica processes we can follow right throughout the plant growth. And he's saying that in nature we see that there's this cycle that the the plant grows up in spring, and there's this upward growth, and that this leads to flowering and the formation of seed. And then in the summer, we have this light and warmth that's coming from above, and that this light and warmth process is what's bringing the nutrition and bringing the quality into the fruit. And he's saying that in the autumn time, this light and warmth being carried on the sand, the silica sand that's in the soil, is drawing this light and warmth in the autumn time back into the soil, and that this cosmic this is what he calls cosmic substance, and that cosmic substance process is being drawn into the soil by the sand. And in the midwinter, it's being consolidated into, in a sense, the quartz that's in the soil. And then in the springtime, this other process of the silica, the cosmic forces, are working from within the earth and pushing back upwards. And so that big bolt of going to seed that we see in the springtime, that's actually a silica process. And that's pushing, and its desire is to go to seed. It's wanting to make the seed so that it can carry on its archetypal species process. And so this silica process that comes out of the ground in the springtime is wanting to become a seed, but it can't unless it combines with that light and warmth from above. We know the process that we can have the fruit set, but it may not ripen, and the seed may not be viable. It's only when we've got enough of this physical light and warmth coming from above that seeding process, first of all, pollination can occur, and then the seed can form and become viable seed for the future. And it's in this process that we start to look at the whole process of glyphosate. And where they're ripening plants with glyphosate, they're not actually viable seed. This process of artificial ripening is not allowing this reproductive process to work all the way through. So just to finish off this second lecture process, Steiner's saying that silica process is being drawn into the earth with the sand, but it's the clay, the silica, aluminium silicate in the clay, that is allowing that silica process to now work all the way through back up to the seed again. And so he's giving us these two substances that we can control this movement of silica. We can use sand to help draw it into the soil, and we can use clay to help it come out. And in a couple of different places in the agriculture course, he talks about potatoes. And if we want to grow good potatoes, and we need to bring that fruiting process from above into the tuber, then we need to use sand, and we need to actually add sand to the soil if need be to control this inward moving cosmic process. He then goes on and starts talking about the calcium process. And he talks about a calcium process that's in the ground being carried by the lime, he calls it. But of course, this is cations, all of the cations, calcium, magnesium, potassium, sodium. The boron links into the aluminium, but we have zinc and copper, and all of those cations are all carrying what is called the earthly substance process. And this earthly substance process, as we know with calcium, it gives the quality of the tissues of the plant. And so this tissue quality is carried on the silica. We can see from a biennial plant that in the first year, that silica process that I talked about is held in the taproot. And the rosette, the leaves form and just run a rosette. And then in the second year, when that silica process pushes upwards, the calcium process is taken with it and carried up into the plant. And when we're talking about fungal control, it's this calcium process coming out of the earth that is released by too much water, too much vitality. And so we have this big watery bubble that's coming out of the earth, and it's actually suppressing that silica process. And there's a lovely line in that sixth lecture where Steiner's talking about fungus, where he says the vitality is so strong that it suppresses this other force, and that this is what then allows this early fruiting process to take place in the leaf realm. And this comment about this other force is just blanked out by the normal biodynamic story. But so what we've got in the plant growth is that the plant moves upwards. The silica, as it moves upwards, helps all these calcium processes move up the plant, of course. And the better the calcium process, the better the tissue formation and the quality of the tissues in the plant. And of course, as the water is moving up the plant, it's taking all these minerals with it and potentizing those minerals as they spiral through the plant. And that this potentized water is now puffed out into the atmosphere. And Steiner calls this the homeopathic calcium that's living in our atmosphere. And in our atmosphere, as we said before, we have all this oxygen and all this etheric force that's living above the plant. And Steiner's saying that the amount of humus that we have in our soil, and we know humus is this oxygen, hydrogen, and carbon process that's able to stabilize boron and nitrogen very, very well. And he's saying the more humus that we have in the soil, the more able this cosmic calcium is able to be drawn back into the soil. And what we see with this cosmic calcium process is that this gives us the mass formation of our plant. So this is the size of our plant. And so what we've got here is that in the calcium cycle, we have the quality of the tissues and we have the size. In the cosmic process, we have this upward growth and the ability for the plant to push all the way through to the end of the seeding process, but then we have the light and the warmth above that's going to give us the nutritive quality of the plant. So within these four processes that we can control, the calcium process is controlled by the cations that we make available, and the sizing process is the amount of humus that we make available, and the clay and the sand as I've described. So now we have these four physical levers that we can apply to our agriculture that's going to control these four growth processes. And this is all in the second lecture, but it's not seen. People don't see it, and they certainly don't talk about it very much. But once we're looking for four processes in everything, you'll see this very, very clearly in that second lecture. So do I need to say more about that? That's yeah, so that's what we get out of the second lecture. Now, this same process of these four activities, once we see that Steiner's talking about cosmic forces, cosmic substance, earthly forces, and earthly substance, when we read the course, we'll see that he's continually talking about this. And generally, it's just whenever he talks about cosmic anything, we just go, oh, cosmic silica, or earthly anything, it's earthly calcium. And so we stay in this polar view, and we don't make big differentiations between cosmic forces and cosmic substance, which in fact they're two completely different activities. And so once we can see this differentiation, the course opens up in a completely different way to how it's generally read and understood. Well, the point is it's not understood. It's very well known that people will say, you can't understand the agriculture course. Well, I challenge that, and I say you can understand it, but you need this medical view of 4 activities taking place everywhere for this to make sense. And it's very obvious in the 4th lecture that there's quite a confusing little piece in there where he's talking about the cow horns. And at the beginning of the 4th lecture, you could say it's a bit similar to the 2nd lecture. He gives this sort of, in a sense, overview of the cow. And he talks about how the cosmic processes are coming from the front of the cow and that the earthly processes are coming from the back of the cow. And he says, the sun activities from the front and the moon activities from the back. And we're getting the reproductive processes coming through the back of the cow and the nutritive processes, as it were, coming from the front. And then he goes in and starts talking about the manure, and he talks about how there is, because the cow doesn't have an incarnated spirit, it's not using the ego or spirit forces in the food that's left over, and so those spirit forces get left in the manure, and that those go through the manure and into the soil. And that's one of the streams by which we strengthen those cosmic forces, those spirit forces in the soil that I was just talking about in Lecture 2, and we can see in that Lecture 8 picture, is through the cow manure. That's one way that they get into the soil. Now, he then goes on and he starts talking about the cow's digestion, and instead of talking about earthly forces and cosmic substance occurring in the metabolic system, as we can see in the 8th lecture pictures, he starts talking about astral and etheric, and he starts talking about the way they work in the metabolic system. Now, of course, it's very, very easy when we're looking at the polar picture of this story to see the astrality is coming with those cosmic processes of the sun coming from the front of the cow, and the etheric coming with the moon forces from the back of the cow. And we interpret this passage as being some interplay between the front and the back of the cow. And this then leads to some confusion about the role of the cow horn and what it's doing. However, in the medical lectures, he's forever talking about the way the etheric and the astral body work as predominant forces in the metabolic region. And so once we can see it in that light, we can see that he in the 4th lecture, he's talking about the way the metabolic system works is by this interplay between the etheric and the astral activity, and that the etheric body brings a sort of growth process, but if we leave water alone by itself, it will become stagnant. And this is what happens with the etheric body. If we don't actually have the astral body, which is the moving planets, as I said earlier on, if we don't have that movement process of the astral body interacting with the etheric, then the etheric becomes very sluggish, and we actually start to, what do we get? We start getting all these depositing illnesses, like a sort of sclerotic depositing of sediment in our bloodstream and things like this, because there's not enough movement. This is the part of the story, of course, with equisetum and how our kidneys become sluggish and start to shrink when the astral activity is not strong enough. and activating and lifting up the etheric body in the metabolic system. And so we can see in the fourth lecture that he's describing in the cow that these four stomachs and this huge metabolic process is being sustained by this interaction of this active etheric working into, this active astral body working into the etheric. Now, what he should have done there was actually start talking about the interaction between the earthly forces and the cosmic substance. And we see this conversation in the 8th lecture, when he's talking about the cow and how we'll be feeding the cow. Instead of using the language of the astral and the etheric, he used the language of the earthly forces and cosmic substance. So, once we see this picture, we can combine those two conversations. And then it clarifies for us about the role of the horns of the cow, where he says very clearly that there's these etheric and astral activity that's coming from the metabolic system, moving forwards towards the front of the cow, and that the cow horn cuts off these streams and reflects them back into the metabolic system. And this is how the cow can maintain this very, very strong metabolic process. And then when we see him saying the cow manure and the 500 is this very strong etheric and astral process in the 500, we get a very clear image that this is a metabolic etheric and astral process. We're not using astral forces from the nerve sense system. We're using astral forces that exist in the metabolic system. And one of the clarifications of the medical lectures is that when we're looking at the nerve sense system, it has a very polar relationship to the metabolic system. And so that the astral activity in the head is the polar opposite of the astral activity in the metabolic system. And so it's a bit like saying in the head the astral is dark blue, and in the belly, it's light blue. And so in the whole story of equisetum and the role equisetum's playing in the kidneys, this is very, very important, because we can have an overly active nerve sense system that pushes down into the belly. And, of course, we start to see constipation and things like that occurring. But at the same time, that highly dark blue nerve sense astrality actually pushes out the light blue astrality in the metabolic system. And of course, the metabolic etheric is looking for light blue. It doesn't want dark blue, it wants light blue. And so it will accept the dark blue, but the dark blue can't get the etheric body active. And so the etheric body becomes very sluggish, and this is where the kidneys start to diminish. And so when we're looking at equisetum, it's light blue. It's an activator of the internal astral body. And so it pushes out the nerve sense astrality, and it retakes this position of the light blue astral in the metabolic, and it can talk to its girlfriend, the etheric, and they can start working together again, and this is then the solution to the kidney problem. So it's a much more sophisticated story that we can start to work with here. And so, as I say, this clarifies the fourth lecture. It clarifies that 500 is a manifestation of a metabolic astral and etheric process. And you know, we have to, in a sense, remember that it is a metabolic preparation. And the way that we get this metabolic process that is normally in a plant in the flowers and in the seeding, the way that we get that to become a stimulator of the soil's metabolic process is that we put it in a cow horn in the wintertime. So in that time when the whole earth processes are stimulated and in a sense the soil is most alive, we're getting this metabolic process and putting it into the earth. And so we're anchoring an above ground process into the earth. And so it stimulates the metabolic activity of the earth. And, we could make a 500 that we put through the summertime, and we would find that that should work more on the sizing of fruit. And this would be one thing that could be tried. And similarly, when we're looking at 501, the silica process, quartz is naturally found in the earth. It's naturally a stimulator of the earth processes that work upwards. And so what Steiner's doing is he's getting this natural head process and he's putting it in the ground through the summertime. So through the time that, in a sense, nature is most in its metabolic body, he's putting this earthly process, not earthly as in calcium, but earth process, and putting it into a cow's horn through the summertime and therefore connecting it with the above part of the plant. And so we're using that silica process to stimulate this nutritive quality of the plant, but he's using the seasons as the directing influence. So anyway, we can then have a quick look and see how this works into the 6th lecture and also into the 8th lecture. However, I am seeing that we've now talked for almost an hour. So we're sort of coming to the end of our time, really.
So we should wind up here and plan another session.
Yeah, that'd be fine. So do you have some questions or clarifications, Ellen, from all of this story?
There's no explanation, Glenn, but I would think that I'm about 50 minutes behind you. And
okay.
That's not a criticism. That's just the way I digest these things. It brings me up with the wonders of how many times Jeff Poppins has read the agricultural lectures, and more sinks in every time by his own report. And I feel much the same way. So I'm glad that you're laying this out for us. And so I have the simplest of questions. I mean, first, I never remember being advised to place sand in my soil as a biodynamic farmer. Was I under-tutored?
Yes. As I say, go and read the last 2/3 of the second lecture and see what's said there. And as I say, there's these two very, very clear statements when he's talking about potatoes. And, I started the whole talk off with saying how biodynamics, for some reason, which I outlined in an article about Wachschmuth, maintains this very, very simple story. And you can say, okay, it's a nice way to keep it simple for the beginners, but we don't seem to get beyond it. And when we can only see what we can see. You don't know what you don't know. And so if you can only see biodynamics as a simple polarity between calcium and silica, expansion and contraction, then that's what you're going to look for in the agriculture course. And so when you start finding these contradictions that are very clear in the way the planets work, in the second lecture he talks about how the outer planets are working from below and the inner planets are working from above. And then in the 6th lecture he says the exact opposite. And so we sort of go, wow, that sounds confusing. and we just drop it. And people even say Rudolf Steiner got it wrong. And they just delete these things. And in a sense, there's been a lot of that deleting going on. And so the whole mindset is we're always looking just for this simple polarity, but it's not a simple polarity. And so where these things don't make sense, they're dropped. And the role of sand is so underestimated as an input, especially on clay soils. And conversely, the role of clay being applied to sandy soils. Now, I guess as I run past here, this whole idea of clay as the middle substance, that's okay if we're talking in a fairly conceptual sort of manner. But once we come into plant growth, it's a clay humus complex that influences plant growth, not just clay. And at the same time, this relationship between clay and sand. And in the second lecture, Steiner comments 3 times that clay works with the upward moving cosmic process. And even where in the third lecture he makes this comment about clay being a middle substance between calcium and silica, he then quickly goes, oh, but it's more related to silica. And I would like to say, in that third lecture, he should have said, you've got calcium and silica, and in the middle, you've got clay, sand, humus, and cations functioning as the middle activity between calcium and silica. And so in a sense, yes, you have been undertutored, and see what happens when you put a bit of sand into a clay soil or put a clay into a sandy soil. It makes all the difference.
Wow. Well, just real quick, how much sand are we talking about?
So I've done both. I spent 15 years on sandy soil, and then I am now on a clay soil, and it's quite a hard clay here, although it's quite rich, but it hardens into rock in the middle of summer. And I put the equivalent into my vegetable garden. I put the equivalent of 180 tonne per hectare over my vegetable garden. And it just opened up fantastically well. It didn't fix hard as a rock through the summer. I could weed it all summer and all this sort of thing. And, so that was not too much. Let's put it that way.
And what was the source of your sand?
River. It's coming out of a river.
Beautiful.
And I just buy it, from the local sand merchant,
Okay. So no problem with salt in there, obviously.
No, that's right. Yeah, that's the one. And it's more of a silica sand, whereas, sand off a beach is often calcium sand. It's all made of seashells.
Okay.
Often. So getting it out of a river is generally a better thing.
Okay, sure. Brilliant. I'm glad that I asked.
Yeah, of course. Yes.
Okay, Glenn, what is the address of your site where your books are?
www.garudabd, GARUDABD.org. And there's a link there to books.
Okay, and for the listeners, I'll be placing the Equisetum paper at the bdnow.org site also.
Yeah.
And then we'll talk later, Glenn.
Okay. Well, thank you, Alan.
Thank you.
Thank you for these opportunities.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Bye.
Goodbye.